Hi, it's Omni from the Marvelous Gaspar Discord server. I want to present to you guys an argument for the presuppositionalist apologists that claim that the laws of classical logic are absolute. Now, if any of you presups that make this claim are watching, take a moment to look at these two statements. If God doesn't exist, atheists can account for the laws of logic. If God doesn't exist, atheists can't account for the laws of logic. Now ask yourself which one you think is true or false or both true, whatever you'd like. You can pause the video and think about it. Let's consider the first statement. Presumably you're going to say that this is false. If God doesn't exist, atheists can account for the laws of logic. So by the laws of classical logic, what this would mean is that if this statement is false, you would have to accept that its negation is true. So now we have, it is not the case that if God doesn't exist, atheists can account for the laws of logic. But here we're going to run into a problem. If we hold that the negation of the first statement is true, then by material implication, we can derive line 2. By double negation elimination on line 2, we can derive line 3. By De Morgan's theorem, on line 3, we can derive line 4. And by conjunction elimination on line 4, we can derive that God does not exist. Clearly, this was not intended, but it follows from the classical laws of logic if we accept the first premise. Now, a way out of this might be to appeal to the rules of the conditional in classical logic, and the rules of the conditional are such: it is only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. In every other row that you see P, the antecedent, being false, the conditional is vacuously true. But the issue here is that if this is what is intended in when someone is making a conditional statement, they are not actually saying anything at all, because anything follows from a false antecedent. Taking this route, someone may intend to avoid unintentional logical consequences, but it would ultimately result in them saying nothing at all, if they were to grant that this statement is vacuously true. Now this leads us to the second statement that I presented at the beginning of this video. If God does not exist, atheists can't account for the laws of logic. Now it seems reasonable that a presup would say that this is true. But true vacuously? Surely they do not accept not G, which would make the antecedent false, and thus the conditional as a whole vacuously true. Was that the intention in saying that statement number 2 is true? With a false antecedent, you are not actually equipped to infer anything about the truth value of the consequent. What is actually going on here when people agree to these statements either being true or false is they have a notion of relevance, meaning that they are appealing to a relevance logic. And a relevance logic, by the way, is a paraconsistent logic, which is just a fancy way of saying that when you have contradictions, nothing funky happens. In order to escape the logical consequences of denying the first line, and accepting that it's vacuously true, we are establishing that there is no contextual relationship between the antecedent and the consequent. Similarly, in the second line, clearly God does not exist is not an accepted position. So not G is also false, making the conditional statement vacuously true. And again, not establishing a contextual relationship between the antecedent and the consequent. It is quite clear that we do not reason in accordance with classical logic. So to even be defending the notion that the laws of classical logic are absolute is absurd.